presents one of the most severe humanitarian crises of our time. With each escalation, the conflict generates more casualties, displacement, and destruction of infrastructure, exacerbating the unimaginable human tragedy in the war conflict zones. Seeking a sustainable solution in the Middle East region is of paramount importance. Stability in the Middle East is vital for the security and development of all the states in the region, including Iran and Israel. We therefore reiterate our consistent appeal to the Council members to redouble their efforts and influence towards this noble goal in full compliance with all relevant international norms, including resolution, decisions, and other instruments of the United Nations. Let us strive for peace, understanding, and cooperation in the Middle East, mindful of the fact that acknowledging the legitimate concerns of all involved parties is a crucial step towards fostering stability, harmony in diversity. I thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Mozambique, and I give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and allow me to congratulate Switzerland on the assumption of the presidency and to thank Slovenia for their successful presidency. I also thank Secretary General for his sobering briefing on the urgent and rapidly deteriorating situation in the Middle East, including Lebanon, and express Guyana's full support to him, including for his untiring efforts. Madam President, the situation in the Middle East is barreling towards a greater catastrophe. Israel continues to expand its military operations to Lebanon while continuing its intense offensive in Gaza. And we are now witnessing a dangerous escalation of attacks between Israel and Iran. Amidst the deadly tit-for-tat, tensions continue to ratchet up on multiple fronts, and the entire region ticks as a virtual time bomb before our very eyes. Guyana urges all parties to step back and to immediately end all hostilities. This Council must act as one, on the side of peace and respect for international law and the United Nations Charter. We must work to de-escalate the situation, and civilians must be protected on all fronts at all times. Madam President, when we met last week to discuss Lebanon, it was clear to every member of this Council that disastrous consequences could ensue from a wider armed conflict in that country. Today, we are meeting amidst reports of ground incursions by Israel into the sovereign territory of Lebanon in violation of the UN Charter and Resolution 1701, and following aerial bombardments from southern Lebanon to the heart of Beirut, resulting in more than 1,000 deaths in the past 2 weeks alone, not to mention the thousands injured and displaced. Guyana calls on Israel to uphold their obligations under the UN Charter and the wider body of international law, including international humanitarian law. Madam President, the people of Lebanon should be spared from the throes of a war neither of their making nor choosing, even as the country continues to grapple with difficult economic and political circumstances. This Council must act in the interest of international peace and security to prevent further tragedy in Lebanon, Gaza, and throughout the Middle East. Allow me to conclude with 3 urgent appeals. First, Guyana reiterates its call to all parties to immediately cease the hostilities and to abide by their obligations under international humanitarian law, in particular, the protection of civilians. We must intensify our efforts for a ceasefire in Gaza, in Lebanon, and every other front of operations. This Council must use all of its available tools to contribute to a diplomatic solution and to the full implementation of Resolution 1701, which provides a clear path for resolving this conflict in a manner that ensures that peace and security can be enjoyed by the people of both Lebanon and Israel. Second, we appeal to all parties to guarantee the safety and security of all UN and humanitarian personnel, including those attached to UNIFIL. As is the case with all UN personnel, UNIFIL has operated under extremely difficult circumstances over the past year and is undoubtedly being placed in a position of much greater risk as hostilities heightened in their area of operations. We must work to ensure that conditions remain conducive for the exercise by UNIFIL of its important mandate. Third, Guyana appeals for a renewed investment in peace over aggression. Let us enable the former at the expense of the latter, as we strive to save the present generation from the continuing scourge of war. As Council members, let us act together in favor of the millions of civilians who are paying the heaviest price in these senseless wars. Justice and peace demand that we do no less. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana, and I invite the representative of Japan to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, let me express our gratitude to Slovenia for their successful presidency in September, and congratulate Madam President on your assumption of the presidency for October, and we express our full support to your presidency. I also would like to thank Secretary General for his sobering and important briefing today. Since last October, the world has witnessed an unconscionable spiral of violence in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and beyond. The recent developments in Lebanon are particularly worrying. We are seriously concerned about the ground operation conducted by Israel Defense Forces in Lebanon. We cannot tolerate any further escalation. In this vein, Japan once again calls for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. All parties need to demonstrate their recommitment to the full implementation of relevant UN Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1701. Japan pays respect to the UN staff and personnel on the ground, devoting the high courts under the severe circumstances. Their security must be ensured. Now, we are seeing the growing needs of the civilians in Lebanon who are facing the onset of a displacement crisis. Thus, Japan reiterates its call on all parties to immediately take all measures to prevent any further civilian casualties and adhere to international law, including international humanitarian law, to prioritize the protection of civilians and ensure humanitarian access. Madam President, the escalation in Lebanon will drag the Middle East into a wider conflict, as was seen yesterday. Japan is deeply concerned about the attacks conducted by Iran using ballistic missiles against Israel. These attacks further deteriorate the current situation in the Middle East. We strongly condemn such an escalation. Secretary General issued a statement that condemned the broadening of the Middle East conflict, and we reiterate his call for an immediate ceasefire. In April, when this council was convened following Iran's large-scale attack against Israel, many of us stand that it constitutes an unprecedented development. However, we have seen what was unprecedented occurring twice within the last 6 months. This clearly shows the Middle East is following a dangerous path that could lead to a catastrophe. We must not let this happen. In this regard, Japan amplified our call to all parties to exercise maximum restraint, work towards de-escalation, protect civilians, and work through dialogue and diplomacy towards peace. Neither the region nor the world can afford any more conflicts. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative of Japan, and I invite the representative of the Russian Federation to take the floor.
Madam President, we would like to congratulate Slovenia with its successful conclusion of the presidency in September, which was not an easy month. And we'd like to congratulate Switzerland with assuming the presidency. We thank the Secretary General for his assessment of the situation in the Middle East, which has become severely exacerbated by an unprecedented spiral of violence in Lebanon and the broadening of confrontation to neighbors in the region. We also took account of the positions by Israel and Iran contained in the letters disseminated yesterday. Unfortunately, the Middle Eastern region in front sliding towards a new large-scale war, whereas the security just there helplessly watching it. The Israeli brutal military operation in Gaza continues despite the demand on the part of the overwhelming part of the international community to stop it. The spiraling of violence predictably led to a worsening situation on the border between Israel, Lebanon, and Yemen, and in the Red Sea. But instead of using diplomacy, the West Jerusalem authorities unambiguously staked everything on using force. And their American accomplices are playing completely into their hands. They are paralyzing the deliberations of Security Council. As a result, the new victim of the Israeli military machine is Lebanon. After intensive shelling of Lebanese towns, the southern neighbor started a ground operation in Lebanon. Furthermore, after a series of political killings, including the killing of the Hamas chair of the political bureau, Hanin, the general secretary of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, and other leaders of resistant movements, Iran came into the confrontation. Iran, who for 2 whole months had been showing exceptional, under the circumstances, restraint. From the statements made by our Western colleagues, we drew the conclusion that the only issue that the Security Council has in front of it is a response to a missile strike by Iran. It's difficult to imagine what kind of role the diplomatic process would play when the situation is viewed this way. And it's presented as though all of this happened in a vacuum, as though nothing is happening, and nothing did happen in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Syria, in Yemen. But